All right, guys, welcome back to Thoughtful Theology. As always, I appreciate you being here. And I am back after a couple week hiatus. We welcomed our first kid into the world. So there's a lot that goes into that. Anybody who's had a child knows that. And so thanks for bearing with me. I hated not being able to make videos, so I am excited here today to get back to it. And today we're going to be doing a response video, and that is a response video to Ricky Gervais. As far as I understand him, he is a British comedian. He kind of went viral during one of those award shows where he was the host. I don't know if it was the Golden Globes or the Academy, whatever award show it was, but he kind of made fun of all the famous rich people in Hollywood, and it was pretty funny, a lot of it, and so that's kind of where he blew up. But he's also been kind of an outspoken proponent at times for atheism. He does it in, again, a sort of more comedic way, but there's definitely thoughtfulness behind his criticisms. As we'll see in this video, I don't think there's a lot of thoughtfulness. I think they're kind of just taglines that he finds to be witty, but I don't think there's much substance to them. And so I want to examine sort of his claims. And he's on this Hot Ones show where they eat wings, and each wing, as they go, gets spicier and spicier. And so as they eat the wings, the host has questions and topics for them teed up. I think the idea is to maybe take their mind off of the spiciness that's going on in their mouth. And so one of the topics that he has prepared for him is this topic of atheism. So without further ado, this video, Ricky Gervais, when he talks about this, is only like a 1-minute clip in him talking, but I'm gonna try to isolate each point and make it a much longer video, because there's some things that he says that I think are worth responding to and giving a better, bigger, more robust treatment to, instead of just glossing them over. So let's go ahead and get right to it.
You've been such an eloquent defender of atheism, but it's interesting because atheism, no one's gonna do a crusade. It's not like they're gonna send missionaries to spread the atheism gospel.
No, well, most religious people.
Okay, so quickly, on one hand, I agree with this gentleman that atheism has less urgency, right, to sort of spread its message, spread its news, because there are no eternal consequences of believing in atheism or not, right? Atheism, for the large majority, unless you're like a panentheist or something like that, and how you can be an atheist potentially is a separate story. But for the most part, atheism entails this idea of non-existence once we die. So if you're an atheist, there's not any urgency to get the message out, right? To tell people, hey, you must convert to atheism before it's too late, because it's just never too late, right? I guess in their mind, the only thing that's going to affect is your life here on earth, because that's all we have. So that part of it's kind of true. Whereas on like theism, Christianity, right, there is this urgency, right, to spread the news, because there are these eternal implications of Christianity. And so that part kind of makes sense. But the funny thing that's worth pointing out in my mind is that this kind of just isn't what we see, though, on the internet. If you're on YouTube or TikTok or maybe to a lesser degree Instagram, the atheist community is very, very, very active and very zealous about sharing their atheistic beliefs and converting people, right? When I'm scrolling through even shorts, I see constantly these live streams of atheists that have the little tagline, "I'm an atheist, here's why you should be too," and call-in shows. So it's, although I think that it makes consistent logical sense that if you're an atheist that you would just kind of go on about your life, that's just not what we see, right? The atheist community online is very, very, very active, and they are very excited and passionate about deconverting people from whatever religion. And so I think here is an important point, and people like Jordan Peterson, which I don't agree with everything he says, maybe a lot of what he says, but what I think he rightly highlights is this idea that religion is sort of just fundamental to the human experience, right? It's sort of in our DNA that we are religious by nature. And so that begs the further question, why is that the case? And I would argue that this would be sort of evidence that we are designed in such a way that we will seek God, because God created us that way. But Jordan Peterson has rightly pointed out that even when somebody like loses a formal religion, right, or like whether that's leaving Christianity, leaving Islam, whatever it may be, and they become atheists, for most of those people, atheism becomes a sort of religion to them. right? As a technical proper definition of atheism would be that it's not a religion, but they make it one, and it sort of highlights the fact that we are just religious by nature, no matter what. If we sort of hold a very fundamental, near and dear belief, we kind of make it into a religion. It's unavoidable, and so that is at least a very interesting point to think about as to why are we humans that way. And again, as I would argue, I think this is some evidence for the fact that God does exist. But anyways, I just wanted to respond to this idea that, atheism isn't a religion. They're not going to go on crusades. And while part of that's true, it's not quite true as far as what we experience on the internet with atheists being very active people.
Are totally fine and normal people. They believe in a God that I don't. When we say a religious fundamentalist, it's a person who believes the mad shit in the Bible too.
But it's clear that you think that the world would be...
Okay, so Ricky's response is kind of, well, I don't have an issue with religious people. Most of them are very fine, nice people. They contribute to society. I don't have much of a concern with converting them. But it sounds like he's saying maybe his concern is with what he calls these religious fundamentalists, and he sort of defines religious fundamentalists by saying that they are the people that believe the mad crap in the Bible as well. And again here, I want to actually always try to extend an olive branch and be charitable. And so on one hand, I kind of agree, right? Depending on, I have a lot of issues with Christian fundamentalists, depending on how we define that. A lot of times that just means people who take everything in the Bible literally, and that is just their hermeneutic, that, hey, if Scripture says it, we should take it literally. And I think that's a really lazy and dangerous approach to the Scripture, right? We should try to understand it in its original context. That is a good hermeneutic, is to trying to understand the audience, the author, the time frame, the culture of that day, that sort of thing. That's how we get to a better understanding of Scripture. And I think that when we do that, those verses and texts that seem mad crap crazy, as Ricky puts it, aren't all that crazy at all, right? They make a lot of sense when we understand them rightly in their context. So he is right that some people, I think, do have some pretty bizarre theological ideas, and I think they arrive at those through wrong means, we'll just put it that way. And so that's partially true, but as a Christian myself, I believe that the Bible is true through and through. Now, I think when we would get to some of those mad crazy verses that Ricky's talking about here, if I had an opportunity to maybe explain to him my interpretation, why I understand it this way, right? I give a good justification, right? I think he wouldn't see that as mad crap crazy. And so believing the Bible through and through doesn't entail that you have mad crap crazy ideas. So let's just keep moving here.
That the world would be a better place if there were more atheists.
Well, it's not to do with being an atheist. There shouldn't even be a word for atheism. There's not a word for not believing in fairies. Where are all these people being persecuted? Do you believe in fairies? No. Rapist. Baby eater. Satanist. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, whoa. This is atheism in a nutshell.
Okay, so his contention here, the gentleman suggests that Ricky thinks that the world would be a better place if there were more atheists. And Ricky's response doesn't really respond to it, but he makes the claim that there shouldn't be an actual term for atheists, right? And then his justification for that is he says, well, there's not a term for people who don't believe in fairies. And I think he thinks that's a clever, quick, witty idea, but it's really not. And I'll explain why. Well, for one, we could coin a term for people who don't believe in fairies, right? There's nothing illogical or incoherent about that, right? We could come up with a definition for that. The reason why we haven't, though, is because there aren't a large number of people who believe in fairies. And I would argue the reason why there's not a large number of people who believe in fairies is because there's not good evidence for believing in fairies. So the biggest difference here is that, of course, we have a name for people who don't believe in God, because the majority of people throughout history have believed in God. And when you have a majority belief for any period of time, of course, there's going to be sort of a term or a word that describes that thing, which is theism, right? And so then his other point within that is kind of this idea that there shouldn't even be a word for it, right? Not believing in something shouldn't be a reason for coining a term at all. And again, this just also misses the mark, because what theism means, right? Atheism is the opposite of theism, okay? And theism is just the belief in the proposition that God exists, right? So atheism is the belief in the proposition that God does not exist, right? Many online atheists try to make the term agnosticism mean atheism, where it's just they sort of don't have a belief, right? They're indifferent. They don't know. They're not sure whether God exists or not. But the true philosophical definition, go look in the Stanford Encyclopedia, is that atheism is the belief that God does not exist. And so there is a reason for having a term, because you are believing a proposition that says that God doesn't exist, and there's this term for believing that God does exist, so it's just necessary that we have this opposite term. It's kind of like what he's saying is like, it just should be so obvious that God doesn't exist that there shouldn't even be a term for it. And so that would bring me to maybe my next point, which is that actually, no, hold on, I'm going to say this point, but it follows up in response to what he's about to say, so let's just hear this out.
Now, one person says, there's a God. An atheist says, can you prove that? They say, no. The atheist says, I don't believe you then. That's it.
Okay, he's going to make one more claim after that I'll respond to. So this is why I wanted to respond, let him say this first, because essentially he's saying there's no evidence, there's no good reason to believe that God exists, right? That's the claim here in a nutshell, that the theist says, hey, God exists, and then I, Ricky, say, okay, can you prove it? And they say no, and I say, okay, well, then I don't believe it. Well, it's not quite that simple. So something like proving God, right? If God is, by definition, spiritual, immaterial, outside of time, space, and matter, right? All these things. And just by definition, we're not going to be able to prove God in the same way that we can prove gravity, right? Something like that. And that's typically what somebody means when you say prove something. You mean definitive proof with certainty that something is true. And that's just not how you would be able to prove, right? Let's just grant for a second that God does exist and that he is outside of time, space, and matter. Then science doesn't have the tools to discover God. They just don't, right? I think science can lead to evidences that support, that are better under the hypothesis that God exists, but we can't prove it in the way that, you might be able to prove something in science. But again, this is just then a category error. You're asking for the wrong thing. It's kind of like, hey, prove your wife loves you. You can't do a lab experiment to show like she's got this love in her bones that is directed towards you. But based on the way she lives, based on the way she acts, based on, all of your experience of her, you can reasonably conclude that your wife does love you. So my point here is just that there are things that are certainly true that we can't prove in the way that we can prove science. So he's putting a criteria onto God that just from the very jump is fallacious, right? It just misses the mark altogether. And then what I would push back though here is we do have strong evidences, right? I think there are lots of evidences in science that point to God, right? The Big Bang Theory, I think, is evidence that points in favor of God. The consciousness, right? What is consciousness? Why are we conscious? Where does consciousness come from, right? If the world is just matter and motion, where does this immaterial experience of consciousness come from? The origin of life, right? We don't know how the first organism came to be. And so there are, what's another one? Even like quantum physics, right? I'm not saying these are definitive proofs. So if you're an atheist, don't be in the comments saying, this guy's crazy, he says quantum physics. No, I'm just saying something like quantum physics opens the door for a lot of questions that makes the universe a little more weird than we thought it was. And so this might be something that would suggest that there's more going on than just the basic naturalistic plot that we've been told for many years. And so anyways, that's kind of my response to this part. And now, oh, sorry, I wanted to say, we also have philosophical arguments, right? The contingency argument, the moral argument, the cosmological argument, or other cosmological arguments, ontological arguments. But those are not things that you can take to a laboratory, and sort of test and prove in the way that he's asking. But you use your logic, you use your reason, and you can arrive at really strong conclusions that something is true or false. Okay, now he's going to make one final claim. I think this is the last thing he says, so I will respond to this, and then I think we'll be good here.
That's all it is. You see, if you took every holy book there's ever been, every religious book, every bits of spirituality, and hid them or destroyed them, okay? They went away and never, right? And then you took every science book and destroyed that. In 1,000 years' time, those science books would be back exactly the same, because the tests would always turn out the same.
Right.
Those religious books will either never exist or they'd be totally different, because there's no test.
Little time delay or something?
No, it's just
Okay, so I don't want to be rude, but it's almost like cringe when I see somebody give an argument that they are kind of so confident in and just think is so good and so profound when it's so bad. So what he's saying here, essentially his claim is that here's a reason we can show that religion is false. And I'm just going to, he says any holy book. So I'm a Christian, so let's focus on the Bible. His point is, hey, you can take a scientific textbook, I don't know, let's say a science textbook on, let's just say biology, right? And then you can take the Bible. So these are our two books, and then we're going to throw them away. We're going to get rid of all of the books, all of the data that shows, you know, this information in this biology book and in this Bible. We're going to get rid of it, all of it, no trace. In 1,000 years, his point is, well, we can study through the physical sciences, we can study biology, we can do the same sort of tests that we ran before to come to these same biological conclusions. But you're not going to be able to do that with the Bible. So therefore, obviously, science is just better, right? Science is clearly superior. The reason this is such a bad argument is because, especially, right, from a Christian standpoint, I don't know everything in every other holy book, but it's intended to be for the most part, a historical text, right? Especially the Gospels, that their claims are that they're eyewitness testimony. So of course you can't repeat history, of course you can't repeat history in the same way that you can repeat science. Again, this is just a category error. History isn't repeatable. It does at times repeat itself, but you can't rediscover Abraham Lincoln in some test, right, that's repeatable. No, Abraham Lincoln lived at a certain time and place, and the only way to observe Abraham Lincoln and derive data and derive information on his life was observing it in the time that he was here. Whereas science, that's not the case. You can continue to do it, but it's just a silly argument to think that this applies, that this is somehow an argument against religion or against Christianity, right? Stick with this Abraham Lincoln idea. Let's say we threw all the information away that we had on Abraham Lincoln, every book, every written document, and we got rid of it. In 1,000 years, his point is we wouldn't have that book on Abraham Lincoln again. It's like, yeah, of course we wouldn't, right? Because it's a historical document. These historical documents are the things that we preserve in order to preserve the teachings, the life, of a certain place or of a certain event or a certain person or a certain place at a certain time, right? So to compare the data we gain from history with the data we gain from science is, again, just a category error. It's just fallacious. Like this doesn't have any sort of this is not any sort of evidence that sort of Christianity is false or that religion is false and that science is true. All it does is highlight the difference in the mechanisms by which we observe each discipline. So anyways, I think that's going to do it for today. Again, like, comment, subscribe. These videos are fun. Hopefully I can get on a better track here now with the baby and getting back to normal. But as always, guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.